payment. Is that going to put a stop to some people going on a foreign holiday? Well, I'm joined now by the editor of Air and Travel magazine, Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, let's see what has happened in the airports in terms of incoming and outgoing passenger numbers with our green list.
Same numbers, Pat, about 13,000 going through Dublin Airport, between 80 and 100 flights a day. What some of the companies reacting to the green list, for instance, TUI, the big tour operator, put on a Greek programme from the second week in August, and Ryanair put on some extra green flights. But it hasn't made a huge amount of difference. There is a parallel world where people are travelling, and the green list publication, there was only one really significant inbound country on that, Italy, about 400,000 inbound, and about four outbound. One significant, Italy, would be about 340,000 a year. This is last year's figures, obviously, and Malta, Cyprus, Greece would all count as Mediterranean destinations. What is interesting, most interesting, is what will happen the next time the green list is up. A lot of talk that regions should be included. In fact, a region is included. Greenland is outside the European Union, but it's a region of Denmark, whereas the Canary Islands is a very low rate, particularly the island of Lanzarote.
The Brits have now added the islands to their prohibited list. In other words, you've got to isolate when you come home from there as well. So what do they know that we don't know about the Balearics and about the Canaries?
Same debate, Pat, and Norway put a 10-day isolation on the whole of Spain on Friday. The rest of Europe, Germany has put a warning against Catalonia. France has put a warning against Catalonia. So the reopening of borders is always a sort of a stop-start, very, be careful as you go project. But most of the European countries are keeping to it. And the spiking that has been quite spectacular over the last few days has pushed some of the European countries, Spain being one of them, Portugal was already there, over the European Union's own, the European Centre of Disease Control's metric of 20 cases per 100,000 in the last 14 days. Quite a few countries riding over that now. The big question when we come up on August the 10th is, will we take the same metric, which is better than Ireland, and the number of countries in that list are going to come down? For instance, somewhere like Lithuania has fallen off it and Malta's fallen off it. Or will we take the approach of adopting the regions? For instance, the Lanzarote had no case until 5 people appeared from North Africa on a boat the day before yesterday. Now the Spaniards particularly are lobbying very, very hard that regions is the way forward, and they would say that, wouldn't they? Because 13% of their GDP is tourism, and they're looking at a pretty horrific story that very well publicised. We all watch English television in Ireland, reversal of policy by the UK over the weekend.
It's one thing to talk about regions which happen to be islands, although with flights who, doesn't really make that much difference. People can be in these places in a couple of hours. But there's no doubt it's different if you can drive in your own car to a region. Very hard to make rules about regions.
It's interesting. Germany would be the example that people would sort of look to. I'll leave it to the listeners to imagine why so much policy has devolved to the provinces in Germany when they rebuilt it in the 1940s. But the German health policy and health advice was federalised. It's quite interesting, quite a little bit of, the people who theorise about these things, saying that Germany's approach to coronavirus was quite successful because it was regionalised. They are also, their travel advice was very it was consistent from the beginning. They had closed their borders, and when they opened on June the 19th, they pretty much stuck with it. I think the problem and I'm bringing a tourism and travel and aviation perspective to this, the problem people are looking at now is inconsistency. If you have a policy, stick to it. Ireland, bears credit for that. Well, some of us would be very critical that we just weren't willing to move with the rest of Europe. At least there aren't the inconsistencies there. They nightmare scenario is inconsistencies where countries appear on a green list and disappear off it again overnight to a 14-day metric.
The anomaly, of course, is that you're on the green list and that's fine, and you don't have to self-isolate when you come to Ireland. If you're not on the green list, though, the flights are still coming in, and we're expected in some way to police the green list. Now, I was watching American television last evening, and they were saying, Governor Cuomo has said if you come from this state or that state, that you've got to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Not a clue how it's going to be enforced.
It's
not a clue.
Daft. I mean, Rhode Island has a 14-day isolation. Delaware, where Joe Biden comes from, at one stage had a 14-day isolation. I think nobody goes to Delaware. You pass through Delaware on the way to places. So it is worldwide. It's easy for Alaska and Hawaii, and they've pretty draconian ones. It's interesting that Finland would be probably next to us the most conservative of the countries. They've put an opening date in place for August the 15th. I think that from the inbound, obviously I've got to declare an interest here. I'm on the Tourism Recovery Task Force. From an inbound point of view, the industry, they all want to be part of the public health initiative and making sure that we don't put a step out of place here. But I think the industry would like to see an opening date, and the quarantine, the self-isolation, in theory, it probably serves that people will follow it, and the green list. But the green list is of little use in terms of international trade, either inbound or outbound. And the problem is we're alone in having a green list like that.
We tell people you can go to the countries on the green list, and when you come back, you don't have to self-isolate. But you do if you go to the other countries, and most notably the big sun holiday countries like Spain and Portugal and France. However, people from countries that are not on the green list are free to come here. They're supposed to fess up and say where they'll be and where they'll be self-isolating. And you have to ask yourself, why would anyone come here to look at four walls? I mean, let's be sensible about this. If you're coming to Ireland as a tourist, and you're coming from Spain, for example, or France, and there are many French people touring the country and so on, and Germans, why would you come here to look at four walls?
The answer is if you're...
And you've got a return ticket that says you're going back in 10 days.
The answer is...
You're going to see nothing. It's just a complete... double think, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Wishful thinking. It's simply not happening.
One way of looking at it, the answer is most people who are coming for 14 days probably at the moment have a family connection. But you could get sort of very obsessed about the 14-day self-isolation. It's unenforceable. It's not legally enforceable. The really important part of it, and the really important part of the entire response, listening to the World Health Organization press conferences every day, is the contact and trace. The locator form is important. If we know who people are and where they're going, we can actually get that contact tracing process. And the aviation authorities, who have been quite critical of government policy, have said clearly they will share the data of who's coming in, what their contact details are, and where they were sitting on aircraft. So what we've seen across in other European countries, I mean, somebody arrived in Malta, they were able to contact everyone on the aircraft, usually the rows to and from, and start that contact, that tracing and testing. And while a huge amount of our debate in Ireland has been almost shaming people who go on holidays, I don't see anyone putting their family holidays on social media at the moment. The whole notion, the principle of the locator form of contact tracing is sound, and that's the way to go forward, particularly if we are to move ourselves out of the mentality where we want to cut off contact with the rest of Europe and see Europe as one economy and one tourist economy and one trade economy. And that's what Europe particularly wants, but they're not going to be bullying countries into doing it, particularly when there's so many unknowns, to quote an American politician, so many unknowns out there that we haven't, with the burst of cases over the last few weeks has challenged a lot of the thinking on this.
And then there's the
There,
No,
th-
no,
there are
knowns.
known unknowns and there are unknown
Yes,
knowns.
that's Donald Rumsfeld.
That's the man.
The question of this COVID-19 Stasi-like operation at the airports and ports, where they're interrogating people and saying, well, are you going forever? In which case, you should have cut yourself off the COVID-19 payment. Oh, you're going on your holidays, are you? And you're not available for work. We'll dock your COVID-19 payment. On one level, that's very unfair because, people may need a break. On the other level, if you're heading to hotspots, and of course, the UK is still a hotspot, even though they claim to have flattened their curve a bit, but their death rate much higher than here, and indeed other European countries. But the idea that you're heading off to places where you're more likely to catch the COVID-19 infection, because it's not on our green list, so it's worse than us, and you expect us to be paying you money while you're over there, potentially infecting yourself and therefore infecting us. That's the kind of the big picture. Individually, there are hard cases. People have put down a deposit. It's a much needed family holiday and so on and so forth. But if you look at it in a macroscopic way, why would Ireland Inc. be paying people to go to places where the infection is rampant?
We've got to strip out the two sides of this, Pat. The holiday maker going away to Lanzarote or to the tourist resorts is not going to be in the heart of the action. There has been incidents, of course, of big parties and discos, and some of them have been closed down. But the reality is that the virus is rampant in the less well-off suburbs, the lower income, and most of what we've seen in travel has been returning residents, Irish residents, and people probably getting back to family in countries.
Let's be realistic. Italy, skiing, Cheltenham, all recreational stuff.
I'm not sure what the infection rate from.
You're in one of the hotspots. You're on.
I'm not sure what we imported from Italy or Cheltenham.
You're mixing not alone with your own crowd, who may be all COVID-free. You're mixing with a lot of British tourists who come from cities which are hotspots.
Yeah, the European aviation people and the European Centre of Disease Control have been tracking the reopening of air routes very carefully. And their evidence is that, there have been imported cases, but it's way below the cases generated from other sources. They don't see aviation as being the opening of the door, the great torrent that not just Ireland, but a lot of countries see air travel as the first place they look. What we've seen, for instance, with the American tourists, we've 26,000 cases of coronavirus. If we have one come from an American tourist, and we have quite a great deal of adverse publicity generated by the 7 days of almost blaming American tourists for threatening our safety regime. So air travel hasn't got that track record you talk of. Yeah,
the figures are quite simple. It took 99 days for the first million cases in the United States, half that for the second million, half that again for the third million,
that's right,
half that again for the fourth million. And that tells you that it's running wild. It's exponential growth at the moment in the United States. I think it was 149,000 people plus, not quite 150,000 overnight, have died in the United States. States are closing down, bars are closing down, states are reversing courses at warp speed, to borrow from President Trump. They're reversing course because things are out of hand over there. So, to say one American tourist arrived here and with COVID-19, the fact that we're bringing in a few hundred every week is enhancing the risk because of where they're coming from.
Is it enhancing the risk in the numbers that we talk about? What's the overall cases caused by travel are not very high. In fact, they're less than 2%. And while travel has rightly been focused on as a source of reinfection, when we reopen travel, we have to be conscious of that. But it's not it's being disproportionately held up as a source of as a problem in our efforts to eliminate the virus. And I think the damage being done by that may outweigh the risk, the elimination of the risk that would be involved in curtailing our international travel.
Now, Eoin, where are we in terms of travel insurance, in terms of our green list and so on? Have we clarified where we are?
Yeah, we're a little bit less all over the place than we were the last time we spoke on that, because the Department of Foreign Affairs advisory has been brought down 2 notches, not just to travel with caution, but normal precautions apply. That's level 1. That's where it was travelling summer 2019. It only applies to the green list countries, and it's not regionalised. That means that a lot of people will not travel with that level of insurance. It also means that the whole corporate scene, inbound and outbound, is pretty. It's eliminated. That means things like servicing machines, repairing machines. So we're a little bit there, but there are some new policies have come in that are allowing people to travel with, if they catch coronavirus abroad, that was being excluded from policies when everybody was a bit more jumpy and panicky in March. They have come in, but they have to be to the green list countries. And as I say, there's only one significant green list country with 9%, Italy. 9% of our entire aviation pass is to those green list countries. And Italy is the only significant one. Greece is also significant.
Some of the comments on how long can this really go on? Either we accept we have to live with COVID and we just get back to travel, or we accept we have to make sacrifices and we shut down all international travel for a few months. Kill the virus once and for all. Enough of this limbo living. Anya in Mayo, what does the 2-week self-isolation mean to visitors to this country? Are they allowed to stay in hotels, go to shops? The question from Anya. If I travel to the UK for literally a few hours, do I have to quarantine for 2 weeks? I need to travel for work to collect goods and bring them home on a ferry. I may even be able to collect them from the port and simply turn around and come back, but I don't want it to cost me 2 weeks. Can you ask Eoin why Scotland and Wales aren't on the green list? We have ferry services and flights to these places. We need to block travel from all failed states where the virus runs rampant under broken leadership. Start with the lads to the left and to the right of us. The workers on PUP imprisoned on the island, surely they have a counterclaim against the government as they lost their jobs because of a government decision to lock down. I'd sue the government. That's from Pa. Off you go, Pa. If I'm going to West Cork for 2 weeks for holiday, I'm not actively seeking employment, exactly the same as if I go abroad. And as the government have not actually said I cannot go abroad, I really don't see how this can be a legal move. Well, we'll come back to those kind of arguments later on in the programme. But on those texts about Scotland, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon has done a great job, even though there's a land border with England, a great job in improving the situation in Scotland. Why can't we fly to Glasgow, Edinburgh?
The regions again. I mean, if you were to take Westphalia out of Germany, Germany would be in the green list. Really important inbound. They're not on the green list. To answer the question about self-isolating, it's if you go to Britain, you don't have to self-isolate coming from Ireland. You do on return. Again, how this works for passengers, people who are thinking of doing it, is you get to fill out your form on the ferry or on the airport. You hand it in with your passport. They then have the number to trace you at and the address that you're at, and a small number of people are being contacted. But I suspect that there's been a lot of emphasis on the enforcement, but the actual fact that it's in place and it needs to be digitised is really what's important in tracking this down. A separate consumer issue, Pat, that hasn't been raised is very important change for the good yesterday from Aer Lingus. They had a voucher scheme brought in at the beginning of March. It's valid for 5 years. We knew that, but they've allowed those vouchers to be combined. Let's say you have a family of 4 booked to go somewhere. The 2 adults can now go somewhere more expensive. They've changed the terms and conditions on those vouchers for the better. There's no sign of Ryanair on refunds. The same terrible injustice still applies. If you've booked Ryanair before June the 10th and your flight departs, you're not entitled to a refund. If you've booked after June the 10th, if you've booked after June the 10th, you are entitled to that refund. It's a big dichotomy. Eddie Wilson was asked about it in the Oireachtas committee yesterday, but Ryanair haven't budged on that. They're saying it's a government issue, not theirs. About 800 to €1 million being lost every day to consumers because flights are departing and they're not entitled to refunds. I do think that some of the other issues that were raised in those texts, who decides whether a tourist is self-isolating or not, that's a real problem, because we cannot have restaurateurs, hoteliers put under that pressure. They have enough to do without trying to police the self-isolation, the quarantine. It needed to be centrally guided, and it's a lot of extra pressure on our inbound tourism industry.
Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Pat.